So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on Sunday morning, afternoon in Australia. And we are quite excited for this webinar, which is going to be like a discussion really with uh, with two well-known therapists in their own rights. And what some of you have in your registration given us questions. So I'll just do a little outline of what we're going to cover today. I'm Ashlesha Bagadia. I'm a psychiatrist and family therapist and a co-founder of the PARC. And um, we have been doing just starting to do family therapy training in India. And this is something that has really interested us in how therapies get adapted to different cultural settings and what might be the differences and similarities. So we thought it would be quite a good way to have a discussion between people who have had this experience of not only seeing people from different cultures, but applying the therapies in different cultures and get involved in training and, noticing that while there are many differences, there are also many similarities. So we'll spend um, like the about 2/3 of the session having a discussion with them, and then we'll open it out to questions. Some of you had already sent us questions. I have incorporated them into the conversation already. Some questions, if they're not covered, then feel free to type them here. We unfortunately won't have time to get everyone's introduction. So when you are asking a question, then just give a brief introduction about yourself so we know, what your context is, where you're joining us from, and it helps our therapists to respond to your questions as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. I will request all of you to please keep your audios muted. And it would be good if you can keep your videos on. If you can't, that's fine. But when you ask a question or when you're conversing with us, then please do turn your videos on. It just makes it easier for us to engage. Okay, so let me start by introducing Catherine Sanders. She's a clinical psychologist and Australian and Canadian trained family therapist and director of Bauer Place. She has extensive public and private sector practice as both a teacher and clinician and has presented across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, Philippines, and India. She was a long-time associate editor of the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Family Therapy. Catherine also undertook specialized family therapy training in Norway. This I didn't know, Catherine. This is new information for me. I thought I knew everything. Bauer Place in Adelaide, where I did my family therapy training from many, many years ago. Is based in Adelaide, but works nationally and internationally, and is a specialist systemic clinical practice, family therapy training. They also do dispute resolution, corporate advisory, and research organization with expertise in complex comorbid symptoms and problems. They've developed extensive intellectual property and curate a subscription-based knowledge portal to share original thinking and knowledge in clinical practice. And definitely in Adelaide, Australia, it's like the go-to place for therapists from various backgrounds. And what we've been very fortunate more recently is that we've been collaborating with Bauer Place and bringing the foundation in family therapy training to India. So welcome, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. And many of you may already know Sarayu, but I will introduce her as well. Sarayu Chandrashekar is a practicing systemic couple and family therapist with 16 years of experience in the field. She has a MS in marriage and family therapy from Purdue University, USA, and an MSc in psychological counseling from Montfort College, Bangalore. She has worked in India, US, and the Cayman Islands in community agency and private practice settings. Currently, she has a private practice in Bangalore where she sees individuals, couples, and families for various relational and trauma-related concerns and supervises therapists from a systemic perspective. She runs trainings and workshops on the basics of systemic therapy and related topics. She is the current head of the India EFT Council, which is the official ICEEFT affiliated EFT community regulatory body for emotionally focused therapy in India. And Sarayu is definitely one of our team's go-to person to refer families, not just to her, but even her supervisees, which is quite a wide network. And I've been sort of following how much the world of emotionally focused therapy has grown in India. And definitely that was one of the reasons we thought it'll be good to narrow down the focus, not just on families, but on couples, because I think that's something that would be interesting for us to talk about. So today we are going to focus on couples, right? And we are hoping that we can broaden our view from how the couples present in even if you're a wider family therapist. So if we start with that, and if I can start with you, Catherine, one of the first things that is a curious thing for any therapist is how do couples present? What is their how do they come to you as a therapist? Do they seek it out themselves? And when they do come, what is their attitude towards a therapist? And maybe if you
That's a
can
very
start off
good
with us,
place.
Catherine, and then I'll go on to
Very good
Sarayu.
place to start, because that's where therapy begins, isn't it? And the referring person and the source of the referral is part of the system right from the beginning. So we will always make a point of being very clear about how come people come to us. Who is the referring person? Have they heard about us from a friend or a relative? Has their GP referred them? Have they been on our website? And if so, what did they see and what did they think about that? We also accept referrals from other agencies. So it's often the case that people will be seeking out couples therapy and they may see somebody for 1 or 2 sessions, and that person might say, look, I think you need to go to Bower Place. And again, there will be a rationale behind that will be really important for us to understand. I think part of what we've found particularly interesting is that you will know that, like you, we're a very multicultural society. We have people from all over the globe who've come since basically 1788. We had our First Nations people have been here for 60,000 years. But since then, there have been people from everywhere, and they continue to come to our country. Often those people don't necessarily speak English, or if they do, it's certainly their second language, and it's not their language of hope and love and disappointment and hurt, which of course is the language we do therapy in. So part of what we also are very interested in is how we work with those families. And I think the other source is people who are referred by psychiatrists, or where one person has a major mental health diagnosis and the psychiatrist realises that the relational aspect is impacting their individual clients' well-being. So I guess I could have said everywhere and it would have kind of covered off on it. You asked me about
Yeah.
attitude. Do you want to hear about attitude? Attitudes,
Yeah.
well, that's about as diverse as where people come from. People sometimes come with huge hope and expectation. They sometimes come with very unrealistic ideas about what we're able to do and how we will do it to them or for them. They don't necessarily come with the same attitude. A couple is two people in a relationship.
Mm.
And you may have one person who's very hopeful and positive and thinks you're going to be fabulous, and another person who has grave reservations about you or therapy at all, or the location you're in, or whatever it happens to be. So attitudes vary enormously.
Mm. Thanks, Catherine. So what I'm hearing you say is that someone has to refer them, and they may come from a referral, but how they present can be completely variable,
Very
and it
different.
varies. Okay, great,
Very
thank
different.
you. Sarayu, what have you seen in India and perhaps in US as well as a comparison?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to follow that poetic response, but I will do my best. Catherine was so beautiful in how she described it. I think as a private practitioner here, my experience is perhaps very like most of you. We get referrals from other therapists, we get referrals from psychiatrists, I get referrals from former clients, the typical network. I think word of mouth is still the most valued way in which
Mm.
people reach out to therapists. In terms of attitude, and in the US and in the Cayman Islands, where I was in more community-based agency setups, there I think we did a lot more proactive engagement with the community. So there was a lot more that we sort of shared with people about our services. We were offering free or very subsidized services. And so that was also a big draw, that it was so accessible, and there would often be a bit of a wait time, but the affordability made a huge difference, I think, in us having a really diverse clientele. Oftentimes, many who were having financial troubles as well, and this was a good source of support for them. In terms of attitudes towards therapy, if I was to look at how it is now, as someone who's been practicing in India for a while, I do find there to be quite a positive shift, I think, in that. I found when I first started my practice, I felt often I was having to sort of prove a case for therapy. I was having to kind of prove that this helps, or try to show that it helps. And now I generally find with many of the people I get to see that there's so much openness, there's so much receptiveness to therapy. I fully agree with Catherine that with couples, there's often differing attitudes, perhaps even differing levels of motivation about accessing couple therapy. I think there's often fear about what it entails. Maybe individual therapy is a bit more familiar to people. And so when they come to couple therapy, there is often this fear that the therapist will side with one person over the other, or that they're somehow going to be told by the therapist that this relationship is going to work or not going to work. I think there are some fears and stereotypes around that. And as I'm sure, Ashlesha, you would agree, sometimes we have clients who want very concrete solutions and want it quick. And so as someone who
Absolutely.
follows and so there is quite a bit of pressure I think that can put on the therapeutic process. As someone who personally follows a more process-oriented approach, like emotionally focused therapy, that is a challenge, and it's something I try to be really clear about when I take on new clients, that this isn't going to be a super quick, very problem-focused, problem-solving kind of approach. And that works for some and it doesn't work for some. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, to know that there are variabilities within each setup. But you actually brought me to my subsequent follow-up question on that is, how do each individual of the couple come with expectations from you guys, expectations from each other, and I'm just wondering whether um, that is something you can talk to, in terms of, is there someone else coercing them, or is one of them more motivated, or is one of them has an agenda, like you said, and the other one doesn't? So I'm just wondering if, I mean, you can use examples if you want, and Sari, if you want to address that first, what kind of expectations do you see in the room now when they do engage? One of the things you already said is they want quick results, whereas and we all know that, quick results is not sustainable in any form of therapy. So yeah, anything else that impacts on the expectations that they have, expectations from you as a therapist,
Yeah.
expectations from each other maybe, or what expectations they might have from an external system.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that comes to mind is sometimes I think there are still quite a few couples who come to couples therapy when they're sort of on the verge of separation, considering divorce, so they're in crisis essentially, and so obviously there's a lot of distress and there's a need to be helped quickly. And so I do also see a fair number of people who are now considering and approaching couple therapy earlier on when problems first arise, which is wonderful. In terms of, are there other people coercing them to come? Again, I think my experience is not going to, I can't generalize my experience because I'm in private practice, and I think someone in other settings would have other experiences with that. But largely, it's not coerced. I think, and I've been pleasantly surprised sometimes to hear that family members will encourage couples to go to therapy now versus, and I'm curious to hear what you've noticed there, but I know even say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was often a need to want to resolve some of these things within the family, that other family members would get sort of involved in to mediate almost. And now I hear them saying, no, my father-in-law said I should try, therapy, or my pediatrician said I should go to therapy. And, these are very encouraging signs for me. In terms of expectations of each other, I think we could spend several webinars talking about that.
Yeah, I know.
In terms of, cultural conditioning around what to expect from a relationship or from marriage in particular in our culture. I think there's a lot of, I feel like we're in a transitory time culturally. I think there are some who have had arranged marriages. There are some who have married by choice, and expectations vary accordingly. I think gender roles seem to play a big role. I still see a lot of women being expected to, take on a lot of the mental and physical labor within the household and parenting while also working full time, etc. I think that's that expectation is there. Um,
Mm,
and I think the expectation that if it is a cis het couple, that the male partner should be the provider, I think that shifted a bit. I don't see that as rigidly as before, I think in our parents' generation, etc. But I think the general sense I get is a lot of people are still trying to figure out what is realistically possible to expect in a relationship. I think sometimes those notions are quite idealistic. They're based on, books and movies and things like that. And when the relationship doesn't go according to, that kind of um, model, I think there's
mm,
a lot of disappointment, there's a lot of hurt. There's an expectation that if we love each other, things should just work.
mm.
And the understanding that attunement takes time, that relationship skills are skills that have to be learned, that none of us just innately know how to do
Mm.
this. And we're learning that, also with this other person. I think those are
Yeah.
some of the things I find really helpful to talk about in the work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarayu. And just thinking about like the wider system that presents, that encourages. You're right. It is more of encouragement of the system. What I see is children often will tell their parents,
Mm.
like grown children will say, "You guys need to go for couples therapy," and and that seems to be a motivating factor. Or there be a problem in the child, which then manifests, and it shows that there's a problem with the couple. Um, I'm just curious, Catherine, because I know one of the ways referral sources for you is when the child protection might mandate. And so in India, we are definitely, at least in the private system, we see when the couple presents, and there may be what I'm hearing Sarayu say is more encouragement from a system, from a wider system. What is it like in your practice right now, I suppose, in Australia? What are you noticing in terms of how do they present and what kind of expectations they come with?
I think that's so important because essentially what we're talking about is the contract that you and the client are forming for therapy.
Sorry, Catherine, can you just speak up? Your volume has gone down for some reason.
Oh, you've lost me. It's very disappointing.
You're
Let me
soft.
just try. I'm
You're
soft.
softer than before.
People don't usually accuse me of that. Is it
Much better now.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
It's what I was starting to say is that I think getting those expectations and hopes and dreams for therapy out on the table right at the beginning of the process is really important because what we're formulating between us and them is a contract. They come to us with a request for something, and we need to know either we can and should and will engage with that contract, or it mightn't be an ethical contract, or it mightn't be one that we can actually do. So part of our protocols, which we call Bow Note, start right at the beginning of a session by asking each person, what are you asking of me? What are you asking of me today? So that when you walk out of this session, you will have something of what you wanted. And what are you asking of me long term? So that when we reach that point, we all agree that the contract's been fulfilled. And we've found that getting very clear in that way right from the beginning is really helpful to the therapeutic relationship, and also very helpful for the therapeutic process. So if someone comes to us asking, and their request is that I don't want my partner to complain about being unhappy, then we may not be able to do much with that. But it also is a jumping off point to think about, well, what are you really asking me for? Are you asking me to stop them complaining, or are you asking me to help them no longer be unhappy so they stop complaining? So we are very mindful and planful about getting those expectations articulated and recorded from the beginning.
And what kind of ways in which do you think there's kind of coercion? Are they coming, sort of with motivation for something, whether it's for change or what kind of ways do they come with?
Well, the whole gamut, really. And sometimes you get both people coming very, very willingly, very hopefully, and, their requests are very clear and clean. But the other thing about getting a clear request is that if there is a third party somewhere that we haven't been able to see, often the request allows you to understand that person's presence in the relationship. So if you ask a person for a request and they say, oh, look, I'm not really sure about this, but when I spoke to my GP, she said they thought that you might be a good person to talk to. Or, I think you mentioned child protection, Ashlesha. We do get referrals from child protection, and it may be that people are very clear that without that organisation, that body, that statutory body overseeing them and their child and their family, they wouldn't go anywhere near you. But we can have that conversation. So what does it mean that you don't feel you've got much choice? What can we do here that will be most useful for you, irrespective of the fact that you have to be here?
I guess that's very helpful to know, because you can, you almost are acknowledging these wider systems and problems, but also you're bringing the focus back to, in the room, what is it that you guys as a couple want or need to work on?
Given that you didn't choose, is there anything that you could get out of this? And if people say to me, no, and I'm only coming here because they made me, then I can be very clear about what that might mean about the work we can or cannot do. It's not my job to persuade.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes that's an attitude that we see in India. Sarayu, you might also see this, is that there is either like an expectation, you are going to tell us what to do and fix our marriage as a therapist, or you're going to side with me and tell my husband or wife what to do, right? That's definitely very much there in India. I don't know, Sarayu, if you've seen it. And the reason I'm sort of mentioning this also is there are questions that came in the registration about in-laws' presence and how much are they present in the marriage, and how much are they coercing or stopping someone. How does that manifest? And do they have attitudes about their, like you said, father-in-law encouraged? I was actually, quite surprised by that. The father-in-law is encouraging this couple to see a therapist. I've experienced the opposite, where a mother-in-law will say, nothing's wrong with my son. You go fix yourself, kind of thing, So just wondering in terms of culturally, because we're talking about cultural sameness and differences. So sorry, if you can come in terms of how do in-laws figure, and if you notice any differences with their practice in different countries, and then maybe Catherine can also tell us what she thinks.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think the in-law conversation is such an essential part of our couple work. I feel like in our culture, it's really something that did not figure much in in couple work when I was in the US or in the Caribbean, in the Cayman Islands. I find that some of our training as well as couple therapists in terms of working with couples and seeing couples as a unit from a systemic perspective, that they're a subsystem that we're working with. I still very much believe in that idea, but I think in our culture, and I assume in other collectivistic cultures, we have to expand that notion a bit, because the subsystem isn't just the couple, it's often their families who are so involved in the, and I think, when we think about involvement, we think about it often as the negative kind, because that's what I think shows up more. But it's often also in a positive way, in that there is support, for example, with parenting, childcare. There is a support in terms of sometimes having somebody to go back and share with if you're having a struggle in the relationship. But I think how I see it manifest, I don't tell me if I'm veering away from the question too much, Ashlesha, but how I see it manifest is that yes, family members are often aware of the challenges the couple is having. They often have strong opinions about it. And again, I want to say, because I'm in private practice, it is different for me because I'm not all the couples I'm working with are in crisis. And I think if you're in crisis, or if there is a more severe mental health condition, I imagine some of these attitudes are also going to be stronger, right? They're going to be more enhanced in sort of saying, no, my son is fine, like, your daughter is the problem. So I'm sure you'll have, other experiences there. But I know for me, this primary struggle seems to be family members having strong opinions, getting involved in arguments, etc. And often the couple hasn't had an opportunity to still form a strong bond with each other and found a way to resolve things within that subsystem. And so if they had found an opportunity to do that, I think it would be easier for them to resolve things when things go wrong. But when that hasn't happened yet, and you have a lot of family involvement and opinions, I think there's a lot of these conflicting loyalties, right? There's a lot of a sense of, I think a very common presentation for us here, as you know, Shesha, is if you're living with the in-laws, and oftentimes it is a wife who's moved into the husband's family. And so she's had to make these drastic adjustments in terms of, being in a new place, around new people, often a different lifestyle, all of these things. And the husband may not have had to make the same amount of adjustments. These are already things which are familiar to him, although he is making adjustments as well. So that situation seems to trigger a lot of conflict. And if that couple hasn't yet had an opportunity to find a way together to resolve things, then I think the family of origin getting involved oftentimes becomes problematic. It adds to the problem rather than helps. So that's one way I see it show up a lot. I don't know if I
Oh, that's
answered your
interesting.
question. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you definitely did, because that is the commonest question that comes up when people are talking about,
Yeah.
oh, will a Western model understand in-law involvement?
Yeah.
And it looks like, you are looking at it very much as how is this involvement helpful versus
Yes.
hindering? And
Yes.
if it's helpful, then it's good. If a father-in-law is encouraging, go, my children, go have therapy, that's great. But if an in-law is discouraging, no matter which culture they're in, that's going to be harmful, and that's what you're focusing on.
Yeah. So if I could just add one more point, I think, therapy modalities would typically, like Western therapy modalities, would typically encourage a couple to say, don't go to the extended family, you're triangling them, right? If you do that, and you need to stay within this subsystem. That's how we were trained. And I think in our culture, that approach just isn't going to work. Because you're essentially cutting people off from what is a resource as well as a potential source of conflict. But it's not a helpful approach, I think, for therapists to take, to sort of just be like, why are you talking about these issues with your family? You shouldn't go to them. You shouldn't. I think that is just not sustainable, because that is so ingrained in our culture to sort of that our families are such a big part of our lives. And so I think there we as therapists have to be flexible and have to look at the nuances of the situation rather than coming in with that approach of, no, 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 you shouldn't be going to them. I find we then will encounter a lot of resistance. That's not going to help us with the process. I think instead we look at how are they contributing, what are ways in which it's helpful, what are ways in which it's not, what are some boundaries that are helpful or not, but not a black and white sort of approach to that, I think.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I'm just wondering, Catherine, what you are thinking when you think of in-laws and couples living with their in-laws. Like right now, the conversation, I suppose, in Australia is that children are staying with their parents for longer, or they've left home and come back again. So, but I'm guessing involvement of in-laws would still be not as much as you'd see in India. So, do you have any thoughts on, how that part of the wider system plays a role for you?
Sorry, because part of what we're thinking about at Bower Place is this whole question of triangles. And I think family therapy particularly got very possessed by the idea of the pathological triangle, that, it was always seen as a negative thing, that it was promoting difficulties. And as you say, the old wisdom used to be, well, let's just go back to the dyad. But we know that a dyad is essentially an unstable arrangement. It needs third parties. You think about the three-legged stool. Two-legged stools don't do well. Three-legged stools do, but you need a good quality leg. And you need a good quality leg that is evenly placed between the other two and not on one side and not or the other. And I think that's really what we're talking about. So now we're thinking about how we create functional triangles, because people, when they have a problem, go and look for another person. It's what we do. We talk to our friends. We go to our family. Your sister, someone, perhaps they can help us understand what's going on here. And if we are going to pathologize triangles always, people aren't going to tell us they're doing it. And that's not going to help our work at all. We need to know. And if we're smart, we will find those functional triangles, those three-legged arrangements that hold up the couple rather than tip it over. So I'm thinking of a case. Is it useful to talk specifics?
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll wake everyone up.
I've seen recently of a couple who they actually presented with an incredibly out of control little boy whose behaviour was so over the top that the mother and the little sister, this little boy is about 9, the mother and the little sister ended up barricaded in a bedroom with the child banging on the door with a knife. And she was ringing her husband to come and rescue them all. So this child was very, very out of control at home. Remarkably, this little boy had the best reputation at school. He had friends. He got on well with other people. And what was clear was that his parents were very, they'd actually become quite frightened of him. And the more they accommodated, the more he demanded, the more they accommodated. And as this happened, they found themselves obviously at odds with each other. These two were relatively isolated in terms of family. The mother had struggled with alcohol addiction herself, but had no alcohol for 20 years. And the father was geographically and I think emotionally quite disconnected from his family. And when they'd tried to speak with their families, they'd kind of given them very, well, you've just got to be firmer, or he's a difficult character, or he's just like your grandfather, what do you expect? None of which were helpful and left them really feeling more hopeless and more helpless. So we sat down and we drew an ecogram, a family tree, which included everyone and also external people. And we discovered that the husband had an aunt who had been hugely helpful for him growing up in a difficult family. And she just happened to live around the corner. And I said to them, what would happen if we I think her name was Julie, what would happen if we brought Julie into the session? Now, the interesting thing when I listen to you talk about families and when I think about when we bring family members in is that Julie was a wonderfully warm, calm woman with very good boundaries who never had any difficulty with this child, and she had a bit to do with him. And her worry was about being intrusive. So our kind of Anglo-Western thing is, oh, we don't want to be intrusive. We don't want to tell the couple what to do. And half of our session was about us trying to persuade her that her involvement in this matter was not being intrusive, it was being helpful. So we had a very simple, we had a very simple agreement with her that if dad worked shifts and was sometimes quite unavailable, if the mother became anxious, the minute she became worried, she was to call Julie and Julie was going to come. And the remarkable thing about it was, having decided, and we did this with the child in the room, because we talked about the fact that he wasn't managing himself and he needed the adults to help him grow up and behave differently. Remarkably, in 5 weeks, she was called upon once physically and once by phone. So her presence, her putting her leg on that stool, that functional triangle was so helpful. And of course, it was overt because we knew she was there and we were able to help shape her, because they were just so anxious about, they sat there saying, oh, we don't want to ask too much of her. She's getting a bit older. I think she was all of 67, but we won't go there. And, we don't want to ask too much of her. And hers was all, oh, I don't want to intrude. Once we got that out of the way, she was a huge asset. And, it just strengthened the bond and gave them another family member. So our view is very much about, yes, of course, there are pathological triangles where boundaries are breached and are not helpful, but our task is to go looking for the functional ones, the ones that will support, help what's quite an unstable dyad.
Yeah,
Did I?
that's very helpful. No, you actually made it quite clear that it's not necessary for people. I don't know if my voice is echoing for some reason. It's not necessary for people to live together to support, to be that third stool, right? So it's how you can bring the wider system in for support. And it looks like what you're saying, just culturally, systemic therapy is also shifted from that, or at least you guys are definitely shifted from that. I guess the other kind of thing that comes up especially in Indian context, just following on from this of involvement versus, say, enmeshment. And, that's another thing that we see in families where there is increased enmeshment. Individuation it's understood quite differently, maybe even by two members of those people in the dyad. Like, I think I need to spend more time with you like this, and you need to spend more time with me like that, especially between parents and children, but it could also be between, say, siblings or friends, or which we might see in other cultures. So I'm just curious to know if it is a pathological enmeshment, and maybe Sarayu, you can sort of speak to it. How might it have manifested, and how hard is it to then address it in the couple system? And I don't know if you've seen that happen.
Yes, no, I think that's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, that does happen relatively often. And I really loved Catherine's example as well. And I think there are times we're able to do that in our culture, in terms of there are sometimes these family members. Ashlesha, I don't know if you've maybe come across sometimes within the larger family, people who would have mediated sometimes at the time of the marriage, at the time of the wedding. And then sometimes they come back later when there's friction between the couple, and sometimes they're able to see both sides. They know both families. They're able to kind of mediate. That's something I've seen sort of play out. But I think in our culture, with the expectation of often living with family, the expectation that, you take care of your parents as they get older, and taking care of them often means them living with you. And this, I feel like culturally we have a great sense of duty and responsibility to elder members of the family, that they are the ones who've raised me, they've taken care of me. So as they get older, I must do everything in my power to be there for them. So I find that some of those pieces really conflict with when the couple are trying to resolve something between each other. That's how that loyalty conflict shows up, is, for example, between a husband and a wife, if they're living with the husband's parents and the wife is saying, hey, I don't like how your mother speaks to me, or I don't like, the way your sister said something about something we were doing the other day. I know these are sort of stereotypical examples, but unfortunately they're real and they're common.
They're real, yeah, absolutely.
But, or for example, if the couple decides they want to move out, that is often seen as such a rupture within the family and such a betrayal of the family system. Like, oh, how could you move out? And oftentimes it is the woman, it's the daughter-in-law who's held responsible for that. Oh, you destroyed our family, you took our son away, you are a bad influence on him, and these kinds of things. And so, um, and for the oftentimes the husbands in these examples, there's this sense of, but my parents have raised me, they've taken care of me, they've sacrificed so much for me. So if I side with my wife, then I am letting my parents down and I'm hurting them. And if I don't take care of them, who will? This is sort of a really common conflict that one comes across.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of how to deal with that in couple therapy, I go back to what I was saying before, in that it's not an all or nothing approach. I think it is about what are some of the boundaries which are sustainable to set and which are not. Like, for example, cutting off family of origin just doesn't make sense, even if some of the family of origin members are kind of toxic in the way that they approach. But instead, it's about how can the couple strengthen their bond with each other, where, for example, say an in-law has an opinion about how you're parenting your child. How can this couple first come to some agreement between themselves about how they want to parent and what are some of the rules they want to have and what are some of the things they're willing to be flexible on? If they are on the same page, when there's another opinion, I think it becomes a bit easier to push back. I think also, I find that even for the partner who's coming from a different family and trying to adapt, if they feel like their partner understands them, their partner is able to see their wounds, then they are also more able to be flexible in dealing with that situation, right? Because they feel like I'm not unseen. And this person I'm with at least understands where I'm coming from and what I need. Yeah. And so then they are also more willing then to be like, I know that cutting off is going to also be very painful to my partner, and I don't want them to suffer. So let us then talk about it, right? Let's try and find something that works. But if they feel like their partner isn't even willing to hear their concerns or understand their concerns, then I think they might also take a more rigid stance in terms of saying, no, I'm not going to deal with this. I refuse. Sometimes, as you know, Ashlesha, sometimes for women, it's like if it isn't working and they try to go back to their parents' household, they may not be accepted there as well. And so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. There are, I think, definite gender skews here. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I think from an EFT perspective, what we see in terms of how we understand that conflict is often one person feeling like I have to choose between abandoning myself or maintaining the connection. Yeah, and for the other person, it's about, can you accept me for who I am, flaws and all, right? And so I think what we find helpful in couple therapy to do is, instead of getting pulled into the semantics of who said what and, the he said, she said thing, we try to look at what is underlying, what is the attachment need that's underlying that hasn't been met within the relationship. How can we try and help those needs get met so that their bond strengthens and they understand each other better, and then they can navigate the wider system better.
That's very helpful, sorry, because and I definitely see that in my perinatal couples, right? Like actually bringing the child into, as a couple, what would you like to do for the child? And then you both can together involve the wider system. And this thing you said about enmeshment, the opposite of enmeshment is not separation, is to how can you have a healthier connection, right? So often when we address it in the family system, that, oh, you're too close or you're too over involved, the assumption that the person might think is you just want to separate us. But you're not saying that. You're saying we're not talking about increased separation. We're talking about increased connection with more autonomy. And that is very helpful.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Catherine, how do you see that in your couples, if any, like enmeshment?
Oh, yes.
It may not even be from the wider system. Yeah.
Well, I think Sarayu's point that to go down the he said, she said, who's right, who's wrong, is probably exactly what's gone down with the person they're enmeshed with, and you're only going to dig the hole deeper. So I think refusing that invitation is absolutely crucial. And one of the ways we would go about it is very much a future time focus. So we will sometimes put aside the current dispute and say, when your children are 10 or 15, how would you like this family to look? What do you want your children to learn about us, as you as parents, about their grandparents, about their uncles and aunts, about the world they live in? What is it you want them to be part of? And what would you like removed? What do you think you don't think is very good for your children to be inducted into? And if we can get some form of coherence between the couple, then we might talk about, well, how can we get other family members on board? So if we agree that calling people names is not something that we want our children to experience or learn to do to other people, how do we actually share that with our parents? How do we go and how do we engage them to help us make the change that we think will be best for the future of this family? So it ceases to be about what you've done to me or not done to me, or what my mother-in-law or father-in-law has or hasn't done. It's more about, we are a family. Clearly, we're not being the best family we can possibly be right at this point in time, but we can be better. But we'll be better if we cooperate with each other. And that may be about, again, bringing other people into the conversation to, first of all, identify what those changes might be, and then how we might enact them. How do we take care of ourselves as we make these changes?
No, thank you. That's a really helpful way of looking at it, right? Like what does this family want as its values, and how can we all sort of contribute to it? And I think that is something that probably will resonate with families from any culture, because they need not adopt the therapist's values or someone else's values. They just have to think for themselves as a family. I mean, just taking this conversation sorry, go on, Kathy.
It's like it draws the poison out of the here and now. And it also reflects on what is best about us. When we're at our best, what do we look like? How do we do more of that?
No, that's really helpful to, think about it that way. I guess just moving on in terms of enmeshments or relationships or situations that we can see are not safe, because that's another thing, can present differently, I'm guessing, across the cultures, but also need to be managed differently because of resources or lack of resources. And maybe, Catherine, if I can get you started on this in terms of how do you handle safety issues in the couples that you see? It could be difficulty of abuse or violence within the couple system or outside, but maybe if you can sort of tell us a little bit more on that aspect.
This is, I think, the place where couples therapists feel most unease, and it's most difficult. And the temptation is to simply go, well, if there's any sign of violence or abuse, I'm not going to do this because it's not safe. And that's great for the therapist. It's not so good for the couple. So we have to draw a very clear distinction between those matters where someone is at genuine risk for serious harm, and that your therapy could actually make that more likely, not less likely, and matters where one or both parties are coercive, are difficult, are perhaps unkind, but not dangerous. And I think what we are really looking for is if there's a climate of fear. If you have a couple where one person clearly is unable to speak freely in any shape or form, that is a signal that going ahead with couples therapy in that form is not a good idea. If you get couples where both have been abusive or violent, then that's where you move very quickly to getting agreement about removing violence, that you can't change this relationship if people are frightened or abusive of each other, because they're not the conditions where change is going to occur. And how do we create safety plans and agreements and people in the wider system who can support safety? And then you can work. If you have those agreements and you have that support both within and beyond, then it's possible to work. But if you have someone who's genuinely frightened and they cannot speak freely and they can't talk about their part in this relationship and what's troubling them, then that probably is not a good indication for couples therapy.
And can I just follow up with that for a question for you, Catherine? How much do you rely on external resources? Like, you know, this is the, I mean, I'm not saying it's a myth anymore because I know what the systems are like, but my assumption is, you know, in the Western world, there are crisis lines, there's, you know, people will step in, you can rely on systems to step in for safety. And I mean, I'll obviously want to hear from Sarayu about that in terms of what it's like in India for her, but just wondering, how much are you able to rely confidently on say, systems, judicial systems, police systems?
Yeah. We are very fortunate. Our police are very good. And I've had wonderful experiences with our police where we have specified domestic violence units within the police where people are trained to manage domestic violence matters. And I had a matter actually while I was on holidays, of course, because that's when they always blow up, with a couple where this particular couple, the woman has been trying to leave the relationship for probably 5 years. And the children are highly symptomatic and it's just a terrible, terrible mess. And I've supported her to seek legal support and information. But this man is very threatening. He's never physically hurt her, but he speaks about how if she were to leave, he will call the police and the police will come and take the children and he will be able to convince them that she's crazy, so she will lose her children. So it's this level of, and I've never worked with them as a couple. In fact, I've resisted working with them as a couple for that very reason. But while I'm on holidays, she decides to leave. And as we know, the most dangerous time in these matters is at the point of leaving. It's safer if they stay, but not long term. So I'm not advocating staying, but I am saying as a practitioner, that's when we go, okay, we need to pull all the stops out to keep this person safe. And I was, she had been to the police station before. I was able to call that police station. I was able to get through to and this is like 9 o'clock at night, get through to the proper services. And they said, we'll do a welfare check. So they would go by and just make, and that we will reassure her that we are not going to take her children away from her. So we are fortunate, but, you know, people slip through the cracks, don't they?
Of course, yeah.
And they don't always be comfortable to seek those other services. You know, getting someone to see a lawyer or someone who will support them, a specific domestic violence worker, because we have services that particularly support women leaving domestic violence. People aren't always comfortable to do that, partly because they're frightened they'll be traced. So there are active constraints to accessing the services that are there.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, Catherine. You're saying just because you can rely on the services, it still is a barrier for some people to access it. That doesn't guarantee safety straight away. No. But also, what you know, it's really nice to hear you say that the thing that we learned initially in family therapy and couples work, at least theoretically, was if there is abuse or violence, no couples work should happen, and that's not the case. And we really need to look at each case for itself. But I'm curious, Sarayu, what is it like? And I've seen a little bit of it, but I'm just wondering what it's like because you work a lot more with couples than I do. So what's it like for you to work with?
This is such a hard area, I think, to talk about because I've had the benefit of being able to see when I was working in the Caribbean, a lot of my work was with survivors of domestic violence, mostly women, and supporting them in various fashions, in group work, in individual therapy, and also then having a lot of contact. That there is much more of a support infrastructure there, perhaps similar to what's in Australia, with social workers and police and lawyers and the courts getting involved, as well as we had um, the counseling center I was with. We had a sister body that would cater a lot to survivors of domestic abuse. And so they offered a lot of resources, support, even with parenting, childcare. They have groups for the kids, they have groups for so there was an extensive support system. And I think what was very painful for me to witness as a therapist with that was, even with all of that, there were so many survivors who were in great danger. And I think, we were working with women largely who had experienced every kind of form of abuse, right? Everything from physical, sexual, emotional, but also immigration and financial abuse. So they would have often immigrated from somewhere else, married someone in Cayman, and so the minute they get separated, they could lose their visa and then have to go back. And that was a huge sort of power differential and something that got held over their heads a lot. There were also programs for men who were the perpetrators, to help them work on what was happening for them, etc. Like pretty extensive programs. But I think that's what I realized was, even with this kind of support structure, things like how long the courts take to resolve something. If, for example, we want a restraining order to be issued, right? How long does it take and what happens in the meanwhile? What if the restraining order is violated? Will it be enforced? Yeah. And what happens to children and sort of sharing custody? If we're meeting in in some sort of public place to hand over the kids from one parent to the other, oftentimes that was unsafe. Oftentimes the women were terrified. There used to be only one shelter on the island. It's a small island, and the location of that would become known at some point. And so then the partners would go there and try to find them. And so, this is such a complex, such a difficult thing. And so I think as therapists, with couple therapy, yes, we are often taught, don't work with these couples at all. And that's how I managed my practice for the longest time. But I think more and more research is coming out now, like Catherine was saying, that shows that if it's attachment-based violence, if it's not coercive control, if it's not what we call intimate terrorism, where there is just such a power dynamic that violence is, and that is more one way, it is more from one person to the other. It's not bi-directional typically. That it is more about exerting power, exerting control. I can't get my way, so I'm going to force you to do what I want. That those situations are not at all safe for us to do couple work with. But many of the situations that present to us may not be that. They may be more people who have issues with anger, attachment wounds, deep insecurities, have witnessed abuse in their parents and in their families. And so when they get to a point in their relationship where they're not able to resolve conflict with their partner, they engage in some of these coercive strategies. But that doesn't mean that there is no attachment there or there's no desire to make things work. This, I think the research says, this is the majority of couples. And that other part, and Catherine can, clarify, but the other percentage is actually much smaller than this, this group of couples. And so when we say, no, we don't want to work with you because there's abuse, as therapists, where do they go? They might continue to be in these relationships. Then what happens? Are they any safer? Because they haven't had any help relationally to work through these things. Yeah. So I think thorough assessment is very, very important. Meeting with both partners individually and having these conversations during assessment is very important. Ongoing, to kind of see if that safety is there. And having conversations about how to prevent escalation. I think that'll have to be our first focus as therapists. And then we can talk about, things which require more safety and vulnerability. First, we need to manage the crisis and the escalation. I also think this is very challenging for us as therapists to do. I think our ability to stay in the room when there is anger, when there's escalation, when there's a possibility of something going really wrong or something going wrong after a session. If a conflict's come up and you're worried that, when we're done, they go home, or now we're doing online sessions, it's like anything can happen and you can't tell.
That's
So,
right, yeah.
so there is a very real concern with this. And so, how much can we tolerate that? How much can we contain that? How much can we focus on the safety building while also doing the couple work? I think that's challenging. Like you were mentioning, Ashlesha, we don't have as many resources in our culture. Like, we can't be like, okay, go to, if you're not feeling safe, go here, go there. There may not be as many options. So I think this again is one of those places where families of origin or friends or other systems can come in very, very handy. And that's what assessment will show us. Are there other safe places, other safe people for them where they can go to? If they are leaving the relationship, how will they manage financially? How will they manage if they have children? There are so many practical concerns. So then they might leave and then come back after a few days because they don't have any of that resolved. And that makes it worse, right? And we know on average people leave, I think, 5 times, right, before they actually leave. So I think as therapists, we have a great responsibility to sort of look at this in a very detailed, nuanced way instead of just going in with that approach of, hey, this is not good for you, you need to leave, because that can then cause other serious repercussions.
Yeah, that's really, thank you for saying that, because that is, as much as there are lack of resources, I feel like what I'm also seeing in India is that even when there is abuse, the option of leaving leaves the woman with in a more disadvantaged position. So working with them in as safely as possible maybe gives her a better chance rather than just saying, no, I'm not going to see you unless you
And
leave the
and
abusive marriage.
the stigma of divorce, the stigma of even,
Yeah.
that's a very real thing in our culture as well. And families are often afraid of that as well and will discourage someone from leaving for that.
Yeah. And it's interesting you're saying that, because my next sort of focus I want to bring into was training, because one of the things that we encountered when we're training a lot of obstetricians at the park now in just mental health. And what's happening with many other health professionals who might end up seeing, I want to say women largely, but it could be a male who's in an abusive marriage, is that there is like almost an expectation from other healthcare professionals saying, why are you still in this marriage? You should leave, without all the things that you guys have talked about, the nuances of how hard it is to leave. And so definitely including that in the training component has been quite interesting for us. And sort of telling the obstetricians that maybe you need to just establish safety and not just tell her that she has to leave if the husband is violent, because she may not have any other option, or refer to therapy. But just thinking about that then, and coming to the sort of conversation around training and how does that look like in different cultures? And Sarayu, maybe if I start with you, you've sort of trained overseas. You're also bringing a lot of training to India. Do you see any differences in what you might have to adopt, in terms of the training component? Do you see any differences in how therapists are presenting as students? Um, yeah,
Oh,
just
good questions. Yeah, I think, as you know, we don't yet have full-blown master's or PhD programs in couple therapy in India yet. I think that is a very important piece and a very significant need that we have. I know the Bar Place and that you all offer a foundational course. I offer a foundational course as well. But I feel like thorough training is so important in being able to do couple therapy adequately, doing it well. It's not just, I've trained in individual work and now I happen to see couples and families. I think that's often because in our country we don't have a lot of training options. That's often how a lot of therapists get into couple work. And I find that if you don't have a systemic view, if you don't have that systemic conceptualization of what's happening with a couple, um, it can really hamper how effective we are with them. So first of all, I would say we really, it would be really beneficial to have some kind of systemic training if you're doing couple work. I think I've certainly benefited from being in a very rigorous training program, and it challenged me immensely. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is too much. But I think it's really paid off over the years. But I think we need more rigorous training. That would be like my first point. Are there cultural differences? I think certainly in like, having trained in a lot of these Western models, coming to India and trying to adapt them to our culture. It's a trial and error process. And I think over a period of time, I've sort of identified for myself what are some theories that seem to work well in our culture. Like I think transgenerational therapies typically work well in our culture because they're very family, they're taking in the family system into account. EFT, in my experience, seems to work well because initially there was some concern around as a culture, are we more stoic and less expressive emotionally? But, in my experience, it seems to really find a solid place in the work. So, again, I've sort of veered off from your question, but I think we need to adapt the theories. I think we need ongoing supervision to do that. It's not enough to have the training. You need that ongoing supervision. Was the last part of your question, Ashish? I think I forgot.
Do you notice any differences in the therapists, in the trainees, or as you as a trainee in another culture? Are our
Yeah.
trainees presenting
I
differently?
hesitate to generalize, but I
Yeah.
think one of the benefits for me, like of training in systemic therapy in the US is um, I found it really encouraging of critical thinking. And I think why that happened was you just get a lot of information put on you that you have to figure out for yourself. Like you don't have a very didactic form of teaching where in our culture, you're really taught lesson by lesson, unit by unit with like, and while that's challenging, I feel like it helps you grow a lot. I try to have that approach when I do trainings. I think sometimes in our culture, when we attend trainings, we have the expectation that all of the information will really be sort of given to you very clearly, that you don't have to sit with the material and figure it out. And I think that makes a difference because then you may not be able to integrate it as much into your work. You're learning, you're listening, but oftentimes you finish a training, go away, and then may not have filtered down into your work. So I think that
Yeah.
critical thinking element, expectations from like how much work do I have to put in when I'm in a training to really make this stuff my own. I think there is a difference there.
Yeah. That's very interesting because you're right, and as you say it, and it's not like I don't think it's a fault of our trainees. I guess the system is that there is an expectation that the teacher will teach me theory, but there's not as much exposure to clinical skills.
Yes.
They're expected to be given a lecture and then go apply the skills without having seen many people apply it. Especially if you've transitioned through a institution for a short period and then doing a work predominantly in the private system. So that's definitely something that I'm noticing. And I might ask you, Catherine, you have now trained lots of people from different cultures in Australia, but also in the last few years have been looking at our Indian cohort. What might be some of the differences you're noticing or similarities?
Well, I actually don't feel that qualified to comment. The things I've noticed is the remarkable enthusiasm of our Indian students and willingness to participate. That I was surprised I think among our students, there is still some of that very Anglo reticence. Whereas I noticed with the Indian students that people get in there and they have an opinion and they talk about things, and it's so it pushes the training on, because it's just a kind of a paradox, isn't it, what we're talking about here? What you've just said, Sarayu, is expecting things to be given the product. But my experience is actually people very willing to engage in the dialogue and learn in that way. Listening to you, it makes me think about our training. We have a very strong value that in our clinical work and in our training, we privilege both word and image, both talking and doing. And so in our sessions, we do all our notes so people can see them. And wherever possible, we get people to help us construct the notes and the ecogram, the timeline. And that's the same principle we have with our students, is that we believe you need to get in there and do it. And you need to do it with structure, just like we get our clients to participate actively in creating the ecogram and the timeline. With our students, wherever possible, we try and give them something to do that they can do well and successfully with our support. And then, of course, as you train and you get more confident, you can do more of the process. So it's not just telling, it's not just talking to or talking at. And this is universal. This isn't, I know you compare, but I can't. So I'm just going to talk about what I think universally is about people actually doing as well as talking. And it's amazing how much you learn when you do. And it's also amazing how much you learn when you go back and you look at the recording of you doing and you go, oh my goodness, I never knew I did this, and look at how unhelpful or how helpful it was in that session. So I think with training, we try and embrace everything and then hand that to the student to begin to practice safely for themselves and the client, and in doing so, learn more quickly.
Yeah. Catherine, even though I asked you to compare, you actually brought it home to some of the discussions you and I have had in terms of, so I don't know if you remember this, Catherine, and I often tell this to everyone. When we asked you to join us and do some training in India, the first session, you were like, oh, I don't know anything about Indian culture. Like, will I be able to do this? And, and I think when we sort of got into it, you realize that the systemic principles apply more or less the same. And
More
that's what's
similar.
happening, right? Even as trainees, there are some trainees who may want us to give them didactic lectures, but if you engage them, which I see Sarayu doing with her training, which we are doing with our training, you engage them and then they get in there and they really want to get their hands dirty. They want to question, they want to do stuff. So as much as we are talking about cultural differences, keeping the cultural differences in mind may be helpful, not just across oceans. I guess this is probably in India as well. You might see someone from North Bangalore and their culture might be very different to South Bangalore, So I think keeping the cultural sort of differences in mind, no matter who you see, may be helpful. But also what I'm hearing both of you say in terms of training or systemic principles is that ultimately it really boils down to those principles in the room, and they're perhaps the same everywhere. If you're doing process-oriented work, no matter which culture you work with, you're going to have to encourage them to engage with the process. If you're going to involve the wider system, you're going to have to encourage them. And you're going to have to watch for pitfalls or barriers to that. So, I mean, it's kind of heartening to draw it to that. And I'll kind of conclude with that, and before opening out to questions, is that there are a lot of differences, but more and more at the bottom, at the core of it, we are all very similar, and especially as therapists as well. If you can follow, the foundation of what we've learned, no matter where you're applying it, it'll be very helpful with supervision, as Sarayu said. So, yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, both of you. That's been fantastic to just, listening. I like, I don't know who said this, but we could go on and have many webinars to talk about these things. But let me open it out for some questions, if anyone has any comments or questions. I haven't seen any in the chat, so if anyone wants to raise their hand or just, yes, Manya, do you want to introduce yourself and then?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Manya. I'm a counseling psychologist. I have been practicing for 5 years, and I'm doing couples work for 2 years now. I am trained in the externship of emotionally focused couples work, and I'm really liking it. Sarayu actually was the one who introduced me to EFT because she had come for our masters in Christ to like do a training, and that's where I fell in love with it. So first of all, thank you so much for this. This was a very insightful session to actually see how it is, different in different places. But also notice that there are like similarities across cultures as well. So I actually had like a question, the part that we were talking about safety and, abuse and everything. And both of you spoke about how if it's stemming from a more attachment based fear, like, if there is abuse from both partners towards each other because it's coming from a place that is not coercive in nature, which is not coming from a place of control. So I wanted to know, is there a possibility for it to only be, coming from an attachment oriented place from only one partner and not both partners? Is that a possibility?
Sarayu, do you want to take that? And then I might.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that might be, oh, I'm sorry, am I echoing? I think, yeah. I think that might be one of the pieces of assessment, Manya, is it's good to see you, by the way. It's one of the pieces of assessment is it bidirectional or is it unidirectional, the abuse? And like Catherine was saying before, what is the level of safety in the relationship? Is one person feeling really unsafe? I think those are some of the indicators that it might be more coercive control. If it is more unidirectional, there's this real lack of safety. And even if the other person is, out of more an attachment place, sort of arguing back or like maybe even being verbally abusive, etc., you can see there's a very clear power differential, between the two, where one person clearly has more power in the dynamic. So those are some of the things you could look at to determine whether it is this or not that. When we say attachment, we're not talking about it as just a one person motivation. We're talking about what is that relationship dynamic like. Is there enough there in terms of care for each other, affection for each other, bond with each other, apart from these conflicts where, sometimes things escalate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what we want to look at.
Thank you, Sarayu. I don't know if you want to add anything, Catherine, in terms of.
It makes me think of some of the couples I work with where we do have these escalating, very unpleasant exchanges. And sometimes my first move, which is quite diagnostic as well as therapeutic, is to say to them they are to stop all arguing. First of all, you want to find out whether they can. And they are to treat each other as if they were their own best friend. So no sex, no expectations beyond what's you're to say, please, thank you, do you mind? To just see what happens when you call a halt to the ugly stuff. And sometimes when people call a halt to the ugly stuff, there's nothing underneath. Mm-hmm. And that's a horrible discovery. And I say to people, the reason I'm doing this is that you'll find what you've got to work on. You'll find what's left. You'll find the warmth and the compassion and the care for each other that you want to have. And then we can grow that. But we can't grow it in the context of abuse and fear and unkindness. It's a bit like, I sometimes say to couples, it's a bit like you have a plot of land and it's covered in weeds. So the arguing is the weeds. It looks green, but it's weeds. It's not quality. And what we're going to do is we're going to clear all the weeds off, and then we're going to see if anything comes up from underneath. Are there really beautiful bulbs? Is there seeds that will make us flowers? We'll discover what is possible if we call a halt, if we take the weeds away. And that can sometimes be the beginning of we talk about deviation amplification, taking a small positive interaction and building it into something that's bigger and bigger. But it's amazing how couples can stop arguing if they both agree to. It's like you just simply say, that's it, stop it. That's enough. You're not to do this anymore. And people go, okay. And they do.
Interesting.
Doesn't always
Thank
work.
you so much.
I'm not telling you that this is the solution, but, it sometimes be a place to begin where you discover what is underneath. I mean, this is a different way of thinking about what Sarayu's talking about, isn't it? What is underneath, not the bickering and the unpleasantness, but what the pain, the disappointments, the history, but also the possibility of something healthy.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I had just one more question. It was more curiosity, actually. So, Catherine, actually, it's for you. Do you work with Indian couples there? And if that's the case, have you seen, like, how does the in-law involvement and all of that, take place when it's outside India? I was just curious about that.
Same. Same. It's I have been so privileged to work with Ashlesha, first of all, when she was here as our student, and then as a colleague training, and then to come to India last year to a conference. And it's just such an amazing, rich culture. It's such a fabulous opportunity to be on the side of something that I otherwise wouldn't have been given access to. You weren't asking me that, were you? But when I see Indian families here, the thing I most notice is that I feel I'm being asked to confirm one person's view about a solution, which is a bit different from what I see with families here, or other families here. I mean, again, we're a culture of so many different cultures. We all started coming from the British Isles, and then we came from Italy and Greece, and then we all came from the Middle East, and then we came from Vietnam. There is such a rich heritage here to learn about. But yes, I think when I think about, and I've got a long way to go working with Indian families, but I think that's the thing I've struggled with most, is the sense that I find myself being cast in the role of agreeing with a solution or a definition, and then having to rework that into something more collaborative that we can all agree with and work with. And I'm very transparent. I'll say, look, I don't really understand what it's like for you to be a child in a family where your parents treat you in this way or you treat them in this way. I don't understand it. You need to tell me. You need to help me understand it so I can work with you. But I think, in our culture, it's not as shown, but I think there is also strong value that we look after our older relatives. Not usually in the same home, but that understanding of we've been raised by and cared for and nurtured by these people, and we owe them a debt, even if they made some pretty unhandy decisions or made mistakes. That's part of what we do as family. Again, I don't think I answered the question.
You did, I think. Manya, are you happy with that?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that.
I've got a lot to learn.
Gayatri, do you want to come in with your question?
Hi, Dr. Ashlesha.
Hi.
Nice to
Good
see
to
you.
see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gayatri. I'm a psychotherapist practicing in Bangalore. And I had two questions. So the first one is, how do you know as a therapist when you're ready to become a couples therapist? And the other is about the course. Like if you've never worked with couples or you don't have couples currently, then are you eligible for the course itself?
Any of you can go, and I think both of you will have answers to give. So
I'm not sure which course. Do you want to talk about the course, Ashlesha?
Gayatri, which course are you referring to, or
the upcoming
EFT
course?
Yeah, we can talk about the foundation course, but do you want to take the answer of how do you know when you're ready to be a couples therapist?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it's so hard to say because I think it's such an individual choice, but I can speak for myself in that I think couples work tends to be a lot more active and directive on the part of the therapist. So you have to have some amount of comfort with, be interrupting, intervening, acting on what's happening in the moment in a session, being able to manage conflict as it erupts. Because when we're working with individuals, generally things are calmer. You just have you and the client in the room, and they're talking about what's happening to them in their lives, in the past tense mostly, right? But with couple work, sometimes it happens in front of you. Things come up, emotions, get high, and conflicts happen. And so it requires that kind of presence of mind to be able to act upon and handle whatever comes up in the moment. And that's very enjoyable for some, and that's not at all enjoyable for others. So I think it's very much a subjective thing in terms of if that's something that's appealing to you. I think if you're considering starting couples work and you haven't done it before, it's helpful to do some sort of training for it first, because otherwise I think we as therapists also feel kind of lost when we're in the room and things are escalating, and it makes us feel incompetent, like I don't know what to do. So some of those basic couple therapy skills, the pacing, managing conflict, conceptualizing cases, not just as a individual's problem, but an interpersonal dynamic. So those pieces I think are helpful to have before you begin, if you have that opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
That's brilliant.
Kathleen, do you have anything?
I
wisdom
couldn't
to
have said
share?
it, I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah.
I think as a couple therapist, you are endlessly confronted with that. I have not got a blind idea what to do right this moment, much more than with individuals, I think. But it's learning to sit with that discomfort and having faith that if you follow good protocols, if you continue to listen, if it's not dangerous, the answer will appear. It's just, if I sit here long enough, it will appear, and it usually does. But I think your point about that being able to manage yourself, I don't think you're ever ready to be a couples therapist. I think you're always a work in progress. And I think the other thing I'd add is to have a good supervisor, because we all grew up, or most of us grew up, in and around couple relationships. We have our own touch points where we will either see them, or we'll see them as too or important or not important enough. I think having someone on the outside who can say to you, what was it about that paralyzed you so much? How come you said what you said? And being able to unpack that, I think that's a really crucial part of working with couples, with anybody, but I think particularly with couples and families.
Strongly agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds
Thank
like
you.
it takes a different level of emotional regulation.
Indeed.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking I wouldn't have an answer to this question with regards to couples, but I find working with families a little bit easier than individuals, because I feel like, okay, I have to do all the work and you have to do all the work, and it's just the two of us in this room. Whereas with families, I feel like there are a lot more dynamics to unpack. You can sort of utilize more energy in the room. So I find family work helpful and a little, maybe, I don't know, easier than individual work. But again, I think what Sarayu's point in terms of, starting with training can actually be very helpful. And that brings me to the other question in terms of our foundation course. So our next round of foundation course is coming up, and it's a 10-week course. And it's just the initial introduction to, the life cycle of a family. And in couples is one part of it, because as you heard both of them say today, that systemic principles is looking at everyone you see, because we are all part of a system and it influences each other. So even working with couples is embedded in systemic principles, at least for systemic therapists. So, and I imagine what I've seen Sarayu do is also then take emotionally focused therapy and then embed it into systemic principles. So because then you can take different bits of and learn, different bits of therapies or theories and learn how to incorporate that into a system. So what we are doing is this 10-week foundation course where you will not be required to be seeing couples, not be required to be seeing families. If you're seeing already, that's fine. And that is just an introduction that gives you an idea of how families present, what are the issues you can keep in mind. And then it leads on to an advanced course that's happening next year. So with that, there is a lot more live learning. You'll be watching us do therapy, you'll be also, learning and being part of the therapy process with families. And that may include couples, that may include other family members as well. So it's more wider focused in terms of family therapy. We have been doing supervision sessions once a month where people who are already seeing families and may or may not have a basic foundation training present, and we have a discussion around it. So I don't know if that kind of answers your initial questions, Gayatri. And Sarayu, do you want to add a bit about what you might be bringing in terms of EFT for
Sure,
couples?
yeah. We have an EFT externship coming up in September. It's online. It's by Dr. Rebecca Jorgensen, a really senior EFT trainer. So if you're interested in emotionally focused therapy and couples work, that's certainly something to try. I think Manya was talking about having done that and hopefully found it really helpful. I'm also going to be running a trauma and systemic therapy course in the end of September. And I also run a course called the Basics of Systemic Therapy, which is about 5.5 months long. That'll be from next April. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, Sarayu, if you can share that information with us, we'll pass it around to everyone if you're interested. And I
Sure.
know we've gone over time and everyone has stuck around. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
If you have any more questions, please feel free to email us and we'll pass them on and keep our experts working beyond the webinar to respond back to your questions. But thank you so much, Sarayu and Catherine. It's been really wonderful talking to you. I could go on doing this for the rest of the day. And thank you everyone for engaging with us. We will be sharing a feedback form with you. If you have any suggestions, comments, please take some time to fill that out. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of Sunday. Thank you so much, Sarayu and Catherine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Ashlesha.
you.
Thank you, Catherine. It was an honor to be on this panel. Thank you all for attending.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Do you want us to stay on the call, Ashlesha? Or
Could you?